Hey, this is Tony with Salt Strong, and in this video I want to give you some tips on catching small juvenile tarpon, especially in backwater creeks and canals and small ditches. Now these fish, they're typically going after very small bait, so I like to throw a very small bait. My favorite lure to use is actually the Gulp Swimming Mullet in the 4-inch or the 3-inch or smaller, and in the white pearl color. And I like to rig these on a 1/8 ounce red jig head. So as far as the jig head goes, the red jig head has been the most effective for me. If the water's really dark, I'll go with a chartreuse jig head, but red seems to work in any conditions, whether it be clear or dirty water. So I like to go with that red jig head. Also, the 1/8 ounce size works very well. The type of setup that I use for my rod and reel is a 2500 size reel, 7-foot rod, medium heavy action, with 10-pound braid on there and a 20 to 30-pound leader. And it works out very well. It can cast that little jig head very far. Now, I was out on the water one day and I had a few of these left and I ended up running out, so I had to improvise. I knew these fish were hitting small white baits, so I decided to take a 4-inch paddletail lure that was in a white color. Now this wasn't the exact lure I was using, I actually ran out of them, but I was using the Slayer SST white paddle tails in the pearl color. Very similar, doesn't really matter as long as it's white and it's a paddle tail, it'll work very well. Now the first thing I did is I just put the whole lure onto the jig head, and I was getting some strikes, but they were very short strikes. They weren't hitting it very aggressively like they were hitting the smaller Gulp Swimming Mullet. So what I decided to do was actually just cut the lure in half. I cut it right down the middle, like so. And you can actually use either side of this for it to work. If you use just the front part of the lure, the very nub, what you would do is just rig it on the jig head like you normally would the lure. Get it on there nice and straight, like so. And what this creates is a lure that does a very quick darting action, very erratic, just like an injured bait fish, and those tarpon were all over it. And also it's a nice small profile, and it's easy for those tarpon to grab. Now if you use the other half of the lure, the paddle tail side, what you get is that swimming action with the tail on the back end. So what I did was just rigged it up just as I would a regular lure on a jig head, pass it through, and then once it's on there, you can get it straight. That lure is nice and straight. And when you retrieve this, you can do a steady retrieve, or you can do a twitching motion, and that'll cause that lure to act a little erratically, and it will trigger a strike. Now this was kind of a last minute thing I decided to do when I was out on the water, just because I ran out of my favorite bait to use for these small tarpon, and it worked out really well. It's a small profile and those fish were after it. So I do actually have some footage of me using pieces of these lures and actually catching these small tarpon. So let's take a look. For this first fish, I was actually using the Gulp Swimming Mullet in the white pearl color. There you can see the lure. For the rest of these fish in these clips, I was using pieces of that white paddle tail lure on the jig head. This piece was actually the part with the tail on it, but something bit the tail off, but the fish was still hitting it without the tail on there. So that will wrap up this video on downsizing your lures to target small tarpon. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to leave a comment down below. Also, if you want to see exactly where these fish were being caught, along with many other videos that me and Luke put out on a weekly basis, showing you the trends of inshore fish, where they are feeding, what kind of structure they're holding in depending on the time of year, the tides, and also the time of day. So we put those trends in videos every week, and you can use them to apply those trends to wherever you may live, not just here in Florida. So definitely check that out at saltstrong.com/insider and become a member of our Insider Fishing Club. Until then, I'll see you on the next video.